Hello everyone, this is the Gaming Cat here, and whoa, it's been a while since I last made a countdown, hasn't it?
Anyway, recently Doug Walker's newest installment of Disney-cember was preceded by an editorial where he talked about how, in spite of the abundance of unnecessary Disney sequels, there were actually some sequels that could have been good but we never got. That got me thinking, video games often have the same case as well. Yahtzee Crawshaw, for instance, is a critic who's known for being very hard on many mediocre video game sequels, to the point where in his Fear 2 review he imagined what a world without video game sequels would be like.
Sure, we'd miss out on genuinely good sequels like Thief 2 or Half-Life 2, but I think that's a small price to pay. Every story would have to be fresh, so the writers would have to work extra hard to make the characters relatable. And best of all, endings would have to have some fucking closure!
But in spite of this, I think there are actually some sequels to video games that would have a lot of potential to them, but sadly don't seem to be getting thought about much. So today, I'm going to talk about the ones that I believe would have the most potential as sequels. I'm not going to talk about sequels that are already being developed, and I'm only going to be talking about sequels that I'm interested in. So, no Half-Life 3.
I don't care about Half-Life.
I think it's safe to say that the Paper Mario games are never going to be the same again. Nintendo seems to be happy with their move away from the RPG genre, so it's likely we're not going to see something like Thousand Year Door again for a while. But in the meantime, I think there's another Mario RPG that sorely needs attention. Super Mario RPG, the very first one. Yes, I know about how it was technically created by Square Enix too, as well as how rare it is for Nintendo to work with a company as big as that on one of their games, but this was still a very neat take on the Mario universe. I always loved the magic aesthetic the characters' abilities had, and the very odd, un-Mario-like feel that the species and monsters had in this game as well. The heavy influence from the JRPG genre just gave this game a very unique feel to it that gave it a really neat identity. I'd love to see this identity returned to and worked with more. We don't have to face the Smithy Gang again or anything, I'd just like to see an excuse to take us back to this very unique version of the Mushroom Kingdom. I'll fully admit that it's hard to think of a good sequel you can make for the Bayonetta series again without making it look repetitive. Bayonetta 2 was already such a strong hack-and-slash game that it's tricky to think of how else you could possibly add on to it, and even then there were certain parts that just felt too similar to the first game. But in spite of this, I'd argue that there's still enough room for a sequel. Part of the appeal of Bayonetta, for example, is replaying the levels to try to get the highest score possible, but the lack of differences in gameplay don't offer much for people like me who don't really care about level rankings. Not only would new levels be pretty neat, but perhaps the replay value could be bolstered by a mode similar to Doom 4's arcade mode where everything's already unlocked and there's small bonuses scattered throughout the level for you to try to boost your score even more with. Just take the ranking system out of the main game and reserve for the arcade mode. Also, even I'll admit that as good as Bayonetta 2 is, it's still got a few other flaws that irk me as well. For one thing, does anyone actually like the combos where you have to pause for a split second between button presses? It just breaks the flow of the game for a bit and doesn't feel right. This is one of the reasons why Alruna was the best weapon in the game, because none of the combos had those dumb pauses. Just remove them entirely for the sequel. Also, I think we can all agree that the stories take themselves too seriously for their own good. I think that for a sequel, it would be neat if the story fully embraced the silliness of those games, if it dropped all pretensions of trying to be big and epic and just went the Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon route of being as fun and campy as possible. It would serve the characters a lot better as well because these honestly are some pretty likable characters. They just don't have a story that helps them stand out even more. So that's what I'd like to possibly see from a Bayonetta 3. More replay value, a fun story, and less awkward combos. Even if it's not enough to base a whole sequel on, I think the fun of these games that's already there should sell it. Come on, don't let the series die after she finally got into Smash. Fun fact about me, I didn't get into Warcraft until sometime in 2009 when I tried out Warcraft 3. Trying to continue following the story into World of Warcraft soon after was not easy to say the least. So many expansions that radically changed everything were released in the time that I hadn't been playing that it was just so hard to tell what was going on. If you ask me, the best way to give people who haven't been playing WoW since 2004 some idea of what the heck's been going on is by retelling the story from a broader perspective. Perhaps by bringing it back to its RTS roots. I'm sure that a lot of the people who have already been asking for a Warcraft 4 even longer than me would probably like it to take place after all of the events of World of Warcraft, but I don't think we should reach that far just yet. The direction the story took during World of Warcraft became so confusing that I think the best thing to do would be to take a step back for a bit. There's a lot of things that happened over the events of WoW that could really use an easy to follow summary, even the parts leading up to the more major events like the death of Arthas. Besides, think of how cool it would be for everyone who was around during the older days of WoW to experience all of the major events again, but this time in a position where they're commanding dozens of warriors instead of just one. Blizzard's already shown that they have no interest in making WoW's story accessible to newer players again, so perhaps this would be the perfect way to draw people back in, by retelling all of the events of what happened in a way that gets rid of all of the confusion and bring the franchise back to the genre that made it big in the first place. Besides, Blizzard's still really on point with their other biggest RTS game. WoW has expanded the lore in all sorts of ways that there's probably a lot that could be done with a new RTS game in the series gameplay-wise. Even if a Warcraft 4 didn't turn out as well as people hoped, I'm certain it wouldn't be Tiberian Twilight bad.
Especially considering how Blizzard's practically the opposite of EA in terms of business practices. Thank the Zalnaga for that. Actually, the RTS as a whole seems to be a dying art.
The only franchise in this genre that's still big nowadays is StarCraft, but even then it's starting to be overshadowed by some of Blizzard's other games. Command & Conquer was previously one of the biggest franchises out there, but after the awfulness that was Tiberium Twilight, it just dropped off the map. I'd love to see the Command & Conquer series make a return to form, particularly with the Generals games. I've already previously stated my lukewarm feelings for the Tiberium games and my unwelcoming feelings for the Red Alert games, and I still stand by my opinion that the Generals games were the best. Though it's true that contemporary games are quickly dying out, particularly the shooters, I think that the core gameplay of Generals was still entertaining enough that it can survive this age of gaming. I'd love to see this game style come back, to take command of one of three hilarious stereotypes called factions, and just crush the enemy with a massed offensive. The Command & Conquer IP is still well known enough that a new solid game could be just what it needs to get back on the market. And god, I just want to see the Generals mode return so badly. That was so much fun. Who knows what other kinds of variations on each faction's gameplay that a sequel could bring. And let's admit it, we'd all love to hear some of that wonderfully corny dialogue and banter return again.
The Iron Dragon marches through your puny defenses. You will come for the toxin, but you'll stay because you're dead.
It's like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's technically offensive, but you're just too busy laughing to care. Alright, I am not someone who will just demand a sequel to everything.
I know when a story ends well and when it should be left where it's at. That being said though, I still think there's a lot of potential in an Undertale sequel. I know that there's going to be a lot of disagreement on this, as the original did end in a satisfying way and didn't really promise a sequel. However, I still think there's a lot of directions the story could be taken. Spoiler alert for those of you who somehow still haven't played it, the game did end with monsterkind making it back to the surface and starting to work on reintegrating with human society, so that alone has a lot of potential in it. We could explore what it's like living in a world where these two species are struggling to get along. We could see how race relations are going both socially and politically, and since it's possible for Frisk to volunteer to become the Kingdom of Monsters ambassador at the end of Undertale, we could potentially see both sides happen from their point of view. There's also potential in seeing how the characters Frisk befriended are adjusting to the new world, considering how long they spent trapped underground and all the changes they could be trying to get used to. Even the gameplay could possibly be advanced as well. It was already experimented with in some pretty creative ways in the original Undertale, and there's probably even more ways it can be pushed. I'm certain there'd be no huge loss from not getting a sequel to Undertale, but I still think there's some creative ideas that could be explored. Besides, the fandom itself has proven that there's a lot of neat ways it could be taken in, not just through some really fascinating comics, animations, and what else have you, but entire fan games as well. It's been almost a year and a half since Undertale was first released, and already we're getting a prequel and a sequel based on an AU from the fans, so I like to think there's still some cool ways Toby Fox could work with this. Toby, if you're watching this, at least consider the possibilities that could come from the future. Also, make Frisk real canon.
You know it's never gonna happen, right?
What do you mean?
Frisk real. It's never gonna happen. Besides, That would be bestiality.
Is this something we need to talk about outside?
No. No.
If there's one game I absolutely wish I had played when I was a kid, it's Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy. Jedi's Cut. I know for a fact that 8-year-old me would have absolutely loved being able to live out the fantasy of training to be a Jedi Knight under the guidance of Luke Skywalker himself. Now that the Star Wars series is seeing a huge cultural revival, perhaps now is the perfect time to give this game a sequel. As cool as this game was, it's far from perfect. The lightsaber combat in all the Jedi Knight games always felt a little off and didn't have a lot of weight to it, and it didn't improve much here. Movement itself was kind of floaty as well and felt kind of awkward. This is a game that could definitely use a modern update, especially since Force Unleashed proved a while ago that this kind of Jedi hack and slash gameplay can still work really well. Can you imagine playing a Jedi Academy reboot with Force Unleashed's gameplay style? That would be amazing! And since the whole plot of the game was about Luke continuing to train new Jedi, perhaps the sequel could tie into the new films even more by taking place right before Kylo Ren turned to the dark side and eventually betrayed the new Jedi. Heck, it doesn't even need to do that either. Perhaps it could take place after the final film of the new trilogy comes out. Whether Luke eventually decides to continue training new Jedi, or he dies and Rey ends up taking over for him, or I don't know, there's just a lot of potential here. Given the sudden rise in new popularity for Star Wars, I think it would be a massive mistake to turn away this opportunity. Let us step into the shoes of a Jedi Knight once more, preserving peace and equality throughout the galaxy. And let it be better than the Battlefront reboot. Before we get to number 1, let's recap. Number 7, Super Mario RPG 2. Number 6, Bayonetta 3. Number 5, Warcraft 4. Number 4, Command & Conquer Generals 2. Number 3, Undertale 2. Number 2, Star Wars Jedi Academy 2. When it comes to gaming, 2016 has been a pretty darn good year. I'd consider it the year of the shooter, as we got a lot of really good shooter games this year. It was kind of needed, considering the decaying state the genre has been in for the past while, so the welcome change that games like Doom 4 and Overwatch brought were greatly welcomed. The shooter game is definitely seeing a revival of sorts lately, and it's for this reason why I think it would be the perfect time to make a sequel to the number 1 game on this list. We're going to go a bit back for this, back when most FPS games were just called Doom clones and there was quite the variation in themes and aesthetics. Some were good and some were bad, and Blood was definitely one of the good ones. The weapons were creative and fun to use, the environments were memorable, it was hard as hell, and it had one of the most sadistically fun anti-heroes ever, Caleb.
I'd say I'm sorry, but you know, it wouldn't be sincere. Singularity generator. Now that doesn't sound good. At least, not for everybody else.
We did technically get a sequel a few years later, but it was held back by chugging frame rates and unsatisfying weapons. Seriously, the first weapon we got in the original was a flare gun. This is just a generic pistol. So if you ask me, this game definitely deserves another chance at a sequel. Yes, it's true that Atari, the current owner of the IP, has expressed no interest in making a reboot, but it's a really big opportunity they're missing out on, if you ask me. Classic shooters have been getting some very successful reboots lately, whether it be Shadow Warrior, Wolfenstein, or Doom, so who's to say that a reboot of Blood is doomed to fail? The previously mentioned games managed to blend both modern and classic shooter elements perfectly, and I'd love to see Blood getting the same kind of treatment. I'd love to see the return of Blood's fun and satisfying weapons and its creative gothic atmosphere, and the addition of things like collectibles or even upgrades could also really bring some neat extras to the table. A modern graphical update could also really help the beautifully dark environments look even better too. Not to mention, just imagine a Blood game with the kind of gore that Doom 4 has. And hell, who wouldn't love to hear Stephen White do his voice as Caleb again?
Well, I've wrestled with reality for 35 years, Doctor, and I'm happy to state I finally won out over it. Everybody dies!
There's just so much creative stuff being done with FPS games now after so long of seeing the genre stagnate and decay, that it feels like this would be just the right time for Blood to make a comeback. I placed this game as number 1 on this list because it's both an opportunity for a great new game, as well as an opportunity for a great addition to the modern shooter comeback. I hate how unknown Blood is nowadays compared to many other games, and I'd love to see it get the attention it deserves. Also, I just want more Blood because figuring out how to use the mods for this game is harder than figuring out why Caleb is completely bald. Seriously, this is before he became undead.
I'm the Gaming Cat, and I'll let Caleb himself wrap this up.
In case I don't see you again. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Wait, I'm evil. I can kill whoever I want.